think we all take enough time to sit back and just really realize where we are in the history of our state. In 2024, Mississippi had the second fastest growing economy in the entire United States. I've grown up here my whole life, never even thought that was possible that we could do that, yet here we are. We also had the second fastest growing family income in the entire United States in 2024. And the reason for that, I think, is largely because of the policies that we've enacted as a state since 2012. And those policies, there is no one that has made the sole difference, but it's a fundamental understanding that the more freedom we give to individuals, the more we allow individuals to keep more of their own money and allow them to invest it and not allow government to invest it, the better off we're going to be. And if you look at the success that we've had in economic development, it really is derived from having readily available sites. It's from having individuals that have gotten the skills that they need to be successful in today's economy. And it's for investing in our people. And you look at what companies are looking for, and the reality is we've had really strong success. You look at, for example, in 2020, 2021, we had the opportunity to take a step back, relax, look at kind of what we needed to do as a state to lay that foundation, and boom, here we are today because of the sheer fact that conservative policies work. To say that again, conservative policies work. They work in education. They work in education. They work in economic development. They work in economic growth, and they work across the board.
You're involved in the Republican governance group. When you go to those meetings with other Republican governments, are other state leaders listening and learning and trying to find out what we're getting right?
Well, look, the reality is the Republican governors across the country are a really tight-knit group. We spend a lot of time together. We spent a lot of time together in 2020 and 2021. We literally did a weekly call. It was usually at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesdays. And every single week, we actually did a call, governors only, just talking through some of the things that we were seeing in our various states. And yes, I take great pride in the fact that Republican governors across the country are literally copying pieces of legislation that Mississippi has passed that has led to some of the results that we've seen. And we don't mind stealing good ideas from one another. I'm just glad that we're finally in a position as a state where other governors are stealing good ideas from us, as opposed to us always having to steal good ideas from other places. That's not true in every category, but in most categories, that is a fact.
That's great. There's one area where there's been a lot of talk about Mississippi success, the Mississippi miracle when it comes to education. How do you explain to people what we've got right that's driving that improvement in standards in education?
Well, I will tell you, I love using the term Mississippi miracle, even though it was the New York Times that coined it, which, imagine the fact that when I read that, I almost choked on my catfish, that the New York Times had said something good about the state of Mississippi. And I use the term Mississippi miracle all the time because it gets people's attention. But please understand, it's really not a miracle at all. We enacted good, strong, conservative education reforms in 2012 and 2013. And then, to their credit, we worked very closely with the State Department of Education to implement those conservative reforms. And here we find ourselves today. And when you talk about what exactly were those conservative reforms that worked, because, it's kind of interesting to me because a lot of the groups that are now fighting school choice in Mississippi were the very same groups and very same advocates that were fighting every single thing that we did in 2012 and 2013 that led to these tremendous results. I will tell you, they were all wrong in 2012 and 2013, and they're all wrong today, fighting more options for parents. Some of the things that we did that made a huge difference. We actually made the initial steps into school choice in our state in 2012 and 2013. We implemented public charter schools in Mississippi, which we don't have as many of them today as I would have liked, but we do have options for parents in the city of Jackson. We have options for parents in the city of Clarksville. We have options for parents through public charter schools in numerous jurisdictions around the state. We also implemented ESAs for special needs students. In 2012, special needs kids in Mississippi were graduating at a clip of 27%. Since then, when we implemented ESAs for special needs students, they're now graduating at a clip twice that rate. Twice that rate. That's game changing for those individuals and for their parents. Not only do we implement school choice, we also changed the way in which we rate individual school districts, because back then there was a 7-tiered system, and I kind of think I'm smart, but I couldn't even figure out what those 7 tiers were and which ones were good and which ones were bad. So now we rate school districts A, B, C, D, or F, because every parent knows that an A is good and an F is not. And at the end of the day, parents have a better chance of providing accountability to their local schools and school districts than any governmental entity ever will be able to. And so you need simple rating systems. Another thing that we did is we started reducing the number of school districts we have in our state. We had 152 in January of 2012. Today we have 137. Now, some of my conservative friends, maybe even some of you in the room, say, well, hell, between 2012 and 2020, you only went from 152 to 135. You only reduced, or 137. You only reduced it by 15. And I agree with you, but please consider in the 50 years before I was lieutenant governor, the Mississippi legislature consolidated exactly 0 school districts. And in the 6 years since then, we've consolidated exactly 0 school districts. And so, again, you consolidate school districts so as to get money out of the administrative office and into the classroom. Another thing that we did, and this played a critical role, obviously, is we passed the 3rd grade gate. Nobody likes it being called the 3rd grade gate, but that's what it was, the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. And in 2013, we said that if you're not reading at a certain level by the end of the 3rd grade, we're not going to socially promote you to the 4th grade, period. Because there's a fundamental belief that between pre-kindergarten and 3rd grade, we need kids to be learning to read. But once they leave the 3rd grade, they better not be learning to read any longer. They better be reading to learn. And so that was a very controversial piece of legislation at the time. There are a lot of groups that are, quite frankly, far left advocacy groups that are now taking credit for the Mississippi Miracle that fought us every step of the way in getting the 3rd grade gate passed. But I want to just mention something because it's important. Probably 25 other Republican states around the country have copied most of our legislation. And the legislating part is important, but it's not just about having good words on the page in our laws. You got to actually have implementation as well. And the way in which we've implemented the 3rd grade reading gate is between 2013 and 2019, we have raised the cut score 3 times on what it takes to pass that 3rd grade reading test. Now, unfortunately, since 2019, the State Department of Education has raised it exactly 0 times. So my view is, in the upcoming legislative session or through the State Board of Education, we need to continue to raise the level and the cut score. Because you continue to raise the level of expectations, and Mississippians do what Mississippians do. They rise up and they meet those increased expectations. And then finally, the piece that really matters is accountability. You got to have accountability in all levels of government, but particularly in education. And oh, by the way, the coalition of the status quo fought us on every one of those pieces of legislation. And they're going to continue to fight doing anything different.
Thank you for that very detailed answer. Mississippi is a solidly conservative state, I think it's fair to say. Conservatives have a supermajority, control of all the statewide offices. Given that, do you sometimes think that there's more that we might do? And if I put this delicately, do you sometimes experience roadblocks to reform? Who and what might those be?
I'm not really good with delicate, so I'm gonna take exception to the question. Not that I'm mad at you or anything, but just because we have a Republican supermajority in the legislature, that doesn't mean we have a conservative supermajority in the legislature. We have 8 statewide Republicans elected to state office. That doesn't mean we have 8 statewide conservative elected to state office. And so I think that's an important distinction to make, particularly in a state like Mississippi. I've got a lot of friends that want to elect hardcore conservatives in every district across the state, and that's just not realistic. What we ought to be doing as a party, in my opinion, is we ought to be focused on how do we elect the most conservative candidate that we can get elected in a general election in any particular district. And that varies from state to state. That varies from office to office. That varies from House seat to House seat. That varies from Senate seat to Senate seat. And so we want to nominate as a party the most conservative candidate that can ultimately get elected. That's my view. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think it's something that certainly, as I look to the future, I think you will see me personally, someone who doesn't have to ever run for office again, really focusing, using the resources that we have accumulated over time in political action committees and otherwise, are really focused on electing conservative candidates across the board.
And looking ahead to the future, what conservative priorities would you most like to see the legislature focus on?
Well, look, the reality is, and this probably isn't going to make anybody real happy because, I always say, appropriators appropriate, legislators legislate, and that's good. But when you find yourself in a position, as we do as a state, where we're in the top 5 in virtually every economic growth category in the country, when we're in the top 5 in terms of every education growth pattern in the country, we must realize that there are some policies that we should continue to work towards, like giving parents more options, like school choice, but there also needs to be a general understanding from all of us that it's not just about what can we be proactive and pass. We must also recognize and realize that, sort of this fundamental belief that oftentimes in jurisdictions it's the government that governs least governs best. And so we ought to also be against policies that are bad for the future of our state. And so from my perspective, I think, and Speaker White has certainly made this a priority, and I commend him for it, school choice should be something that we continue to fight for in our state. Because look, our education results are incredible. Virtually every other state is envied. Literally every other state. We're number 1 in the nation in growth in 4th grade reading and 4th grade math for the last 10 years. But if we do nothing going forward, that's gonna stop. Because every other state is working to improve their results as well. It's not like as we pass other states, as we go from 50th to 16th in overall educational results, it's not like every other state is not doing anything. It's just we're doing it better. And if we refuse to enact school choice legislation and know that Texas has done it, Arkansas has done it, Louisiana has done it, Tennessee has done it, the fact Alabama has done it, if we refuse to give parents more options and continue to add competition in a realm such as public education, then our successes will be short-lived, and none of us should be willing to allow that to be the case.
Before moving on to one or two national issues, just touching on that, how big a priority would school choice be for you in 26?
Well, I think it's the single most transformational piece of legislation that we can pass in 2026. So again, I think that let's be clear. I mean, we do a lot of polling in my shop, and 75% of Republicans in Mississippi, bar none, are for school choice. And there's another 8 or 10% that really aren't sure if they're for it or not. There aren't very many Republicans that are against school choice in terms of voting. And my view, and one of the reasons I've been relatively successful in the political realm over the last 22 years in our state, is I just kind of have a general view that the voters aren't nearly as dumb as a lot of politicians think they are. They usually get it right. And I think that Republican voters particularly are right when it comes to school choice.
And looking at the national picture, there's a federal shutdown. Should we be worried in Mississippi about that?
Well, I cannot for the life of me understand why the Democrats in the United States Senate voted 13 times during the Biden administration to pass a clean CR which keeps spending at current levels, and they refuse to do so today. It makes no sense. It's a clean CR. It has no Republican policy goals in it, and the Democrats refuse to pass it. Now today there was a bill that would have paid our troops, and only 3 Democrats crossed the line and actually voted for it. So 55 senators voted for it, but it needed 60 to pass. I have to get in the weeds sometimes managing things. So there's sort of 2 areas where there is where it's problematic with the federal government shutdown. The first area is state government employs thousands of people who are funded through federal grants or federal dollars, and we have to make a decision. Are we going to furlough them, or are we going to assume that just like they've done every other time there was a shutdown in American history, that they're going to give us the federal money to back pay those individuals? So I think they will pay federal workers through back pay, and so we have not yet furloughed them in state government en masse. The second area where the federal shutdown has a major impact, and federal agencies are now scrambling, are in those federal transfer payments that provide specific dollars for specific purposes. As an example, SNAP benefits. SNAP, we were notified yesterday by the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, that they will not have adequate, they have paid SNAP benefits for the month of October. As of November 1, there will be no federal money to pay SNAP benefits. SNAP, for those of you who don't know, is basically food stamps. So there will be no federal money for food stamps as of November 1. There are a lot of people that are going to hurt if that is the case. WIC is a program that we run on behalf of the federal government. They have notified us that there will be no money to buy formula for women who recently had babies who do not have the means by which to buy formula. There will be no federal money for that as of November 1. So again, we're moving into uncharted territory, and there are going to be a lot of regular, everyday Americans that are going to be hurt. And Chuck Schumer said that the situation gets better for him and better for Democrats nationally every day. I don't understand how you can sleep at night knowing maybe it gets better for you politically, but everyday Americans, many of whom, by the way, vote Democrat, are going to hurt and they're going to suffer. And it's just, the Schumer shutdown is a prime example of a Washington, D.C. that is broken.
President Trump famously came to Mississippi in 2016. Some people might say that rather like Reagan and Neshoba, it was a turning point in his campaign. How well do you know Trump and his team, and is there any chance you could get him to come back?
Look, I'll never forget. I don't think I've ever told this story in public, but I was riding down the Natchez Trace sometime in September-ish of 2019, and my phone rings, and I answer, and the person on the other end of the phone says, "Hey, Tate, this is President Trump." I'm like, "Dude, I'm on the Natchez Trace. It's really not easy to get great cell phone coverage here. Let me pull over and hang on a second." Long story short, he said, "Look, I want to come campaign for you sometime soon. And I have been told by my team and some other people in Washington that I should come to Jackson to do that. What do you think?" And I said, "Mr. President, I appreciate your team. I respect them. But I want you to come to Tupelo." And he said, "Well, I'm going to do what you want." And he came to Tupelo for me on the Friday night before Election Day on Tuesday in 2019. As you may recall, I was running against the sitting incumbent Attorney General at the time, Jim Hood, who was from Houston, Mississippi, not far from the center there in Tupelo. Literally, there were at least 12,000 people. I'm sure the fire marshal was really upset, but the fire marshal was a friend and he didn't want to tell anybody they couldn't come in. But there were 12,000 people in the arena that night. You look at the TV coverage and the number of articles that were written in the last 7 days of that campaign, and it was literally 90-10 favorable to our campaign. And it was a big reason why we were successful in winning. You know, the Democrats have spent, in my 2 races for governor, they have spent over $30 million to beat me. $30 million. Like, that's a lot of money anywhere. That's really a lot of money in Mississippi. And the reason they did it is not just because they hate me, although they really do hate me nationally. But it's not just because of that. It's because we're showing that conservative policies work. And they don't just work for some of our kids in some of our school districts. They don't just work for some of our economies. They work for everybody. I mean, one of the things I love to talk about in education, as an example, African American students, in 2013, black 4th graders in Mississippi, when compared to their peers, scored 45th best in America. After the conservative reforms that we enacted last year, they scored 3rd best in America. Hispanic students in Mississippi, last year, number 1 in the nation compared to their peers in 4th grade reading. Number 2 in the nation in 4th grade math. Conservative reforms work for kids all across the spectrum. It's just a fact. And they didn't want us to do that. But back to your original question, yes, I think there's a real good chance the president comes back to Mississippi. We are in contact with him and his team. I won't say daily, but most days, working on a lot of different things across the country. And obviously, I will tell you from the border policy, because I believe that if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. And I went to the border in the previous administration, and I will tell you, it was unbelievable what I saw. And so kudos to the president for doing everything he can to get that in order. He loves Mississippi. I sometimes get in trouble. I've said this to him personally, and I'll say it again. The one thing I can promise you about Donald Trump is that Donald Trump loves to be in rooms full of people who love Donald Trump. And it ain't real hard to get a room like that in Mississippi. And so I'm guessing we can get him back. The vice president is coming next week. Vice President Vance is coming to Mississippi next Wednesday. Going to be on the campus of Ole Miss at a Turning Point event, which is a big deal for me personally because I personally knew Charlie, and I know what he did on college campuses around this country to make sure people understood that regardless of your politics, that we live in the greatest country in the history of mankind, and we need to realize that, we need to recognize that, and we have a lot of challenges. We have a lot of challenges in our state, we have a lot of challenges in our country, but we still live in the greatest state, the greatest nation in the history of mankind, and we ought to be proud of that, and we ought to be willing to say that.
Governor, thank you so much.